while the last segment might have been somewhat satisfying, it was still heavy. The stories about Gaza are difficult to cover. But I wanted to kind of pivot over to the topic of a potential war with Iran, which honestly, the United States has been pressured to engage in, not just over the last few years, not just over the last decade, but for literally decades. Now, oftentimes when we talk about Israel and how I believe that we're being pressured by Israel to go to war with Iran on Israel's behalf, it's because I know too much, I've seen too much, and honestly, Netanyahu can't keep his mouth shut. So that's what this segment's about. I want to put our current moment in historical context. And with that being said, let's get into it.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
That clip that you just watched featuring Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was from September 12th, 2002. Prior to the US preemptive invasion and war in Iraq. And interestingly enough, he name drops Iran as he is encouraging the United States to go to war with Iraq. Now, of course, Israel had an interest in the United States fighting a war in Iraq, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. And what we should do, and what I really wish our political class would be willing to do, but they're all too corrupt to do it, is maybe consider the mistakes that were made in the lead up to the preemptive war in Iraq and how we were being goaded by the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu to do that invasion based on a false premise. And that false premise was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, we did the invasion. It was a complete and utter disaster. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And of course, everyone should be asking, why the hell did we invade a country that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11 and really posed no threat to US national security, especially because they did not have weapons of mass destruction? Now, the fact that they didn't have those weapons didn't stop Netanyahu from lying to the American people and the American government. And when the US finally invaded Iraq in 2003, do you think the IDF joined us in that war? No, they sat back. They watched, they enjoyed, as over 4,000 American soldiers died, as hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians died. So now we're thinking about a potential war with Iran. Does Iran pose a national security threat to the United States? No, they don't. Does Iran pose a national security risk or threat to Israel? Yeah, they do. If Israel wants to fight that war, they should fight that war. But Israel doesn't want to fight that war. They want you or your kids to fight that war. They want you or your kids or your family members to pay for that war. And that's a super strong statement to make. I get it. Until you actually look into the history and the decades of statements and lies that have been uttered by Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel. So let's get into that. Israel's current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been pressuring the United States to fight its wars in the Middle East for decades. Okay, so in every instance that I'm gonna show you, he lies and fear-mongers about Israel's enemies allegedly developing nuclear bombs or having weapons of mass destruction. And if you're wondering where the Bush administration got that idea, who planted the seed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, look no further than Netanyahu, who as early as December of 1990 was already spreading lies about the threat of these Middle Eastern countries. So here he is, this is December of 1990 on the Today Show. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think I've stated our policy, and I think it's very much your policy. That is, the question is really, how do we ensure that these weapons of destruction, these missiles, these chemical weapons, the nuclear program that is fast accelerating in Iraq, that these do not pose a threat in the aftermath of the crisis, assuming it gets out of Kuwait. This is an issue for the entire international community.
Saddam Hussein did not have possession of chemical weapons. He did not have possession of weapons of mass destruction. He was not developing a nuclear bomb. That was a lie. And just think about the timing here. This is in December of 1990. Okay, so you have Netanyahu already going to work. All right, how do we manufacture consent for war in Iraq? Not a war that we Israelis want to fight, but we want to get Americans to fight it for us. So he began planting that seed, but it didn't take long for Netanyahu to use the same fear-mongering tactics when it came to Iran. Here he is in his first address of a joint session of Congress. This is in July 10th of 1996. I was just 10 years old when he addressed a joint session of Congress in order to drum up support for a war. Let's take a look at that.
The most dangerous of these regimes is Iran, that has wed a cruel despotism to a fanatic militancy. If this regime or its despotic neighbor Iraq were to acquire nuclear weapons, this could presage catastrophic consequences, not only for my country and not only for the Middle East, but for all of mankind. Only the United States can lead this vital international effort to stop the nuclearization of terrorist states. But the deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close.
The deadline is getting extremely close. Bro, it's 1996. What are you talking about? In 1996, you have Benjamin Netanyahu saying, weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear bomb is right around the corner. We must do something about it. We need regime change. US, invade. Spill your blood. Use your treasure. We're gonna sit back and watch you do it. We're not gonna get involved, but we're gonna pressure you to do it. And by the way, this is 1996, but this is before the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. And Citizens United, made our politically corrupt system so corrupt, it's on steroids, which creates an opening for foreign interests to have far more sway and influence over our politicians. So, back in the 1990s, you've got Bibi Netanyahu running his mouth about how, Iraq and Iran, they've got a nuclear weapon right around the corner. We got to do something about it. But no one was willing to pull the trigger, probably because they hadn't been corrupted enough yet. Because remember, the politicians aren't going to send their kids to fight that war. They're not going to go fight that war. Mark Levine's fat ass isn't going to go fight that war. Your family members are going to fight that war. Ordinary Americans are going to fight that war. So a single year after the 9/11 terror attacks, the terror attacks that Netanyahu said were good for Israel, Netanyahu testified before Congress and encouraged the United States to invade Iraq, but he also cited his other interests in that region. Take a look.
The problem is you're not dealing with Iraq alone. You're dealing with a terror network. You're dealing with a system where you have proxies. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. So I guess that doesn't include California, but includes Washington. But what it does, a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is, while no one is watching, under the cloak, is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. I believe that the next step is to choose. It's not a question of whether you have to take action,
just choose the right one.
But what kind of action and against whom. Saddam is probably, in many ways, a linchpin, because it is possible to take out this regime with military action, and the reverberations of what happens with the collapse of Saddam's regime could very well create an implosion in a neighbor regime like Iran. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
Yeah, I'd love to see a regime change in Israel. I see Israel as a much bigger problem than the Middle Eastern countries that he's referencing here. Keeping it real. Notice how he mentioned Libya in that speech in 2002. Gee, I wonder why the United States got involved in that conflict. I wonder why we engaged in a regime change war in Libya that took out Gaddafi. Was it because we were concerned about the people of Libya? Because we're certainly not concerned about what's going down in Libya right now with the literal slave trade. Makes me sick. This makes me sick. On September 27th, 2012, Netanyahu gave an embarrassing speech before the United Nations General Assembly and lied repeatedly about the nuclear threat posed by Iran in order to drum up support for regime change in Iran, obviously carried out by the United States. Let's take a look at that.
So how much enriched uranium do you need for a bomb? And how close is Iran to getting it? They have to enrich enough high enriched uranium for the first bomb. Where's Iran? Iran's completed the first stage. Took them many years, but they completed it. And they're 70% of the way there. Now they're well into the second stage. And by next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks.
That was September of 2012. September of 2012. Netanyahu claimed, oh my God, Iran, months, maybe weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Think about it. Big threat. Okay. By the way, the Iran nuclear deal that was secured by Obama and some of our allies wasn't signed until 2015. So between 2012 and 2015, there was no deal ensuring that Iran was not enriching uranium to build a nuclear weapon. And in that time period, they didn't have a nuclear weapon. By the way, you want to know who does have nuclear weapons? Israel. The Israelis have nuclear weapons. They don't admit it. It's a big open secret because the US, the theory is that the US illegally transferred nuclear weapons to Israel, which I wouldn't be surprised by. But they have nuclear weapons. When I was in grad school, there was one specific political scientist that we would read about or from. We would read his work. Kenneth Waltz is his name. And he pushed this theory that at the time I thought was insane. But I'm really starting to rethink whether his theory was insane. It's called the nuclear peace theory. Sounds crazy. And the idea is once nuclear weapons exist, there would be more global stability if every country had nuclear weapons. Now, his thought is states are rational actors. And if they know that the use of these weapons, these bombs, would lead to mutually assured destruction, well, no one would use them. I think the rational states or rational actors part of it, there's a lot of heavy lifting there. At least that's what I thought back then. But Israel can't really bully its neighbors around if they have nuclear weapons, right? If mutually assured destruction is a possibility. So this obsession with preventing its neighbors, with Israel wanting to prevent its neighbors from having a nuclear weapon. First of all, let's just dispel the notion that the Israeli government is concerned about Americans and our safety. They couldn't care less. The only use they see for us is their personal ATM account, so we can pay for their bombs and the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza and the West Bank. But I just want to be very clear. In 2012, 2012, Netanyahu said Iran was months, maybe weeks away from having a nuclear weapon, and that was a lie. He told the American people before Congress that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons. Okay, they had nuclear weapons. We got to do something. He lied. And by the way, what happened with Syria once Bashar al-Assad was taken out? Israel goes in, they capture some territory. It's not difficult to see what's going on if you're willing to be a naughty boy or girl and not listen to the mainstream media narrative in the United States about what's happening here. Later in March of 2015, Netanyahu told a joint meeting of Congress that the Obama administration's decision to remove economic sanctions on Iran in return for Iran signing the JCPOA, that's the Iran nuclear deal, would have terrible outcomes, terrible. He said, Iran will become even more aggressive and sponsor even more terrorism when its economy is unshackled and it's been given a clear path to the bomb. Except the nuclear deal, which wasn't just between the United States and Iran, it was between Iran, the United States, Russia was part of it. We had European allies who were part of it. You have the international agency dealing with atomic weapons, able to go into Iran to ensure that they weren't enriching uranium, to ensure that they weren't actually developing nuclear weapons. But Netanyahu hated the Iran nuclear deal, hated it, absolutely hated it. So in April of 2018, Netanyahu claimed that he had conclusive proof of a secret nuclear weapons program that Iran had been hiding for years. He wanted to show the evidence that he had. So let's take a look at this laughable evidence that he's presenting.
Iran lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear files. A few weeks ago, in a great intelligence achievement, Israel obtained 0.5 ton of the material inside these vaults. And here's what we got. 55,000 pages. Another 55,000 files on 183 CDs.
Man, I really hope you transfer those CDs to a USB drive. I mean, technology has been updated a bit. Wow, whoa, you got some files and some CDs? That's not a bomb, and there's no evidence of them making a bomb. Like, what is that? What is that? So that was what he said in 2018. This is April of 2018. And like the good little boy that he is, a few weeks later, May 8th of 2018, Donald Trump stupidly pulled out of the JCPOA, which again ensured that Iran couldn't enrich enough uranium in order to build a nuclear bomb. Because Netanyahu doesn't want diplomacy, okay? He wants regime change. And when you engage in a nuclear deal that ensures that they don't build a nuclear weapon, that gives you less reason to go to war with Iran. And Netanyahu don't like that. He likes it when he effectively pressures the United States to risk their men and women in the armed forces in wars at his behest. So just weeks later, again, that's what Trump decided to do. And now Trump is considering entering, a new nuclear deal. There's a lot of pressure from neocons, the same neocons who back Netanyahu, who back Israel, who backed all of the regime change wars that we engaged in. They're pressuring Trump to not pursue diplomatic means and get a new nuclear deal signed. And I have no idea what Trump is going to do. To be honest with you, I'm not dumb. I don't have hope in Trump. But I do have some hope when it comes to a significant portion of his voters who don't want this. I mean, take a look at Mark Levine's ex posts, goading Trump into going to war with Iran. All the comments on those posts are Trump supporters and they all hate him. And so if they speak up loud enough, honestly, I think they're our only hope at this point in preventing a war with Iran. But Trump's also very transactional. So who knows? If he gets paid enough, he'll do anything. Finally, I just want to give you something I came across that I think is pretty relevant to this discussion. So back in 2010, a video emerged of Netanyahu speaking on camera. He was speaking to settlers in the West Bank. And he made some interesting statements. A newly revealed tape shows Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once openly discussed his intent to attack the Palestinian government, undermine the Oslo peace accords, and manipulate the United States to ensure its approval. The 2001 recording shows Netanyahu meeting with Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Addressing potential US opposition to Israeli expansionism, Netanyahu says, and I quote, "I know what America is. America is a thing you can move very easily, move in the right direction. They won't get in the way." So now the real question is Donald Trump willing to get in the way? Or is he gonna be a little bitch for Netanyahu like Bush was? Because history doesn't look fondly at the Bush administration and what they got into. And I know Trump is someone who actually really does care about his ego, cares about affection and validation. So what does he want his legacy to be? That of George W. Bush, or maybe something better? An American president who's actually willing to stand up to the government of Israel and the loathsome acts that they want our country to engage in. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.